Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Navy League's December Special Topic Breakfast. I'm Luke Lorenz, Government Affairs Manager at the Navy League, and today's moderator. I'd like to introduce to you Navy League National Executive Director Mike Stevens, retired 13th Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy, who is with us today to introduce our speaker. Sir, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Luke, and good morning, everyone. It certainly is a pleasure to be here with you this morning. Also, our president of the Navy League, Mr. Bill Stevenson, wanted to thank all of you for your attendance and wishes he could be here, but he's currently in Phoenix, Arizona. We're excited to welcome our special guest, Commandant of the Coast Guard, Admiral Karl Schultz. Admiral, we're happy to have you back again this year. Thank you so much for joining the Navy League. General Dynamics is pleased to sponsor this special topic breakfast. These events do provide a meaningful opportunity for industry and thought leaders to hear from and interface with senior defense leadership. And the Navy League is honored and privileged to organize and host this most important event. And now to our special guest. Admiral Schultz assumed the duties as the 26th Commandant of the United States Coast Guard on June 1st of 2018. He previously served from August of 16 to May of 18 as the Commander Atlantic Area, where he was the operational commander for all Coast Guard missions spanning 5 Coast Guard districts and 40 states. He concurrently served as the Director of DHS Task Force East. Admiral, we look forward to your remarks today, and again, thank you so much for joining us. Over to you, sir.
Well, good morning, Mike, and 13th Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy. It's always a privilege to be with you. You know, you and Jason Vanderhayden, our Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard, share that lucky 13 number. But thanks for all you and the National Navy League of the United States do for the United States Coast Guard on a day-to-day basis. And it truly is an honor for me, and I'm very appreciative of the chance to have an opportunity to talk to you a little bit about what the men and women of the Coast Guard are doing, challenges ahead, and some opportunities we see here. You know, first, I think it's important to let the audience know that your Coast Guard men and women have been busy. You know, there has been no slowdown in operations through the global pandemic. As a matter of fact, I think we're working harder than ever. There's some challenges in these unique circumstances with pushing ships downrange to conduct the missions. And I know, you know, the Navy-centric audience here appreciates that. We've all watched challenges across the services, particularly the naval forces. You know, I'll give you an example. You know, down in Miami, Coast Guard Sector Miami, where I had the privilege of commanding back there in 2006, 2008. That unit alone, through the ports of Miami and Port Everglades, which is up in Fort Lauderdale, the latter one, you know, they removed 150,000 cruise ship passengers in a couple-month period. And I got to tell you, each and every one of those was uniquely difficult. Involved interaction with municipal government, port authorities, the seaport security providers, the cruise lines. If you could go to the next slide, just a couple pictures of that. That was a pretty big challenge, and they did it remarkably well. And if you sort of pull that up to the national level across the Coast Guard, there's about 250,000, 250,000 cruise ship passengers in that same period that came off cruise ships. In the subsequent weeks, there's another tens of thousands of crew members. And the Coast Guard worked very hard with the cruise lines to repatriate those cruise passengers, those cruise ship crew members. And you know what's of note here, I think, is some of those cruise voyages did not even start or have United States port calls on their itinerary. But we did what America does, American exceptionalism. We stepped in and we worked hard and we did the right thing by humans to avert, you know, further spread of COVID at sea. And what we're seeing here across the nation is an uptick. You know, folks have taken to the water as a safe form of recreation amidst the global pandemic. That's a great thing. You know, we're folks that live and thrive around the water. But with about a 12% uptick across the Coast Guard search and rescue cases, you know, again, the men and women at the pointy end of the spear at our small boat stations, they've been fully engaged. And a lot of these new boaters, while they may have the means to buy a boat, they don't necessarily have the experience or take the training to operate those boats safely. So we've been busy on that front. Our inspectors that inspect commercial ships and facilities in our 355 nation seaports, they're continuing important critical work as well. Expecting, you know, thousands of containers, screening the imports of hazardous cargoes, ensuring crew members operating on these foreign vessels are following our environmental laws. They're ensuring the safety standards when, you know, Americans potentially, you know, when we get back to cruise and go on board. But that's busy work. And what we saw specifically, as you sort of tie it to the COVID challenge, was when the USNS Comfort sailed out of Norfolk. We worked very hard with our Navy colleagues to inspect that ship and make sure she was fit. She had been in the layup period to get up to New York. We also had a couple of Coast Guard commanders that were interfacing between the USNS Comfort crew and medical staff and the city of New York. And that middle space, interagency space, is something we do remarkably well, and that was well served. Those same inspectors, not specifically down in Norfolk, but those same type of inspectors worked with MARAD across the period here as we look at, you know, great power competition and contingencies and preparedness around the globe. We do these MARAD does these turbo activations of the MARAD and the ready reserve fleets. And coasties are actively involved in ensuring we go from cold iron to sort of, you know, operationally ready in a short turn time. And that's about a 120-hour turn to take a ship from that cold iron to operational ready stat. So we work very closely with Administrator Busby and the MARAD team. So that's what our folks have been doing a little bit. If you go to the next slide, you know, and also it shouldn't be lost on anybody that this 2020 Atlantic Basin hurricane season, the busiest on record, you know, 30 named storms, 12 of them, actually 13 of them became hurricanes. Within that 13, 6 were major hurricanes. That's category 3, 4, or 5, winds north of 111 miles an hour. That's a big deal. You know, 13 of those storms made landfall in the United States, and some with more impact than the other, but each and every one of them requires the same level of diligence and preparedness. So our folks, particularly down the Gulf region, have been very busy. Some personally impacted with losses of their homes or damages to their vehicles. They've evacuated their families multiple times between the 1 June and 30 November end of the hurricane season. But that's another place your Coast Guards have been at work. And you know, when these storms come in, we move our assets out, we come in the immediate aftermath, we conduct rescues, we reopen critical waterways. You know, no one needs to be told how vibrant and important that brown water, blue water intersection down in New Orleans is that feeds the heartland and allows exports to travel around the globe here. But all of that is part of what we call the marine transportation system that fuels our economy. It's about 30 million jobs tied to that MTS and about $5.6 trillion of annual economic activity. So there's another place your Coast Guard men and women sort of out of sight, but on the front lines. And you know, any one of those storms that was Harvey-like or Katrina-like could have had a whole lot different outcome here. And there was complexity and size. Fortunately, they hit in some areas of lesser population, but there was travesty, or there was tragedy and devastation with each of them. Fortunately, not at the levels it could have been. And then I look here in the Western Hemisphere. You know, what have your men and women of the Coast Guard been doing? The president signaled for an enhanced counter-narcotics operation back around 1 April of calendar year 20. And through and into December here, we remain committed to that, along with our Department of Defense colleagues here. The Navy's had more ships operating in the Eastern Pacific and the Caribbean than in many years. And on those ships, we put Coast Guard law enforcement detachments. We've got precision marksmen aboard Navy SH-60 helicopters that can shoot out engines of fast boats that refuse to stop when hailed. And we've seen some success. We saw about a 37% increase in cocaine and other drug interdicted in the period of the surge versus the previous period. And when you roll all that up in the last 5 years, the Coast Guard piece of that is about 2.2 million pounds of pure cocaine. I wish it was a million tons. We probably wouldn't have a cocaine challenge anymore. But 2.2 million pounds, more than 3,000 smugglers, you know, brought into the criminal justice system. That completes the interdiction cycle. They flip, they cut, you know, a 20-year sentence down to 10 or 12-year sentence by offering some information that allows us to feed the intelligence cycle, and that goes on and on. But very appreciative of our Navy brethren in the fight and other DoD assets supporting that. But that's been busy. You know, normally we've got about 4 ships we commit on an annual basis down there on paper through the global force management process. We've been at about 150% commitment for previous couple, 2, 3, 4 years. This actually pushed us up to almost a 200% commitment on that. 6 to 8 ships on any given day working this important vector. And why it matters? You know, we're north of 70,000 deaths on American streets here tied to drug overdoses and drug-related violence. So that's another place where couldn't be any prouder of the work of our Coast Guard men and women. You know, next slide, we've got the Arctic. We look north, and we've had some New operations this year, what you see on the slide is one of our 270-foot cutters. We have both the Tahoma and the Campbell operating up around Greenland here in the late summer, early fall. Tahoma sailed with the Canadians and the Second Fleet and went over to Greenland. We interacted with the Dutch and the Danes, the French, and we had some challenges. The ship that was supposed to sail initially, the Campbell, had some COVID challenges, and we couldn't get her ready in time. So we ended up putting Tahoma out first. We followed behind with Campbell. Campbell did a big Arctic search and rescue exercise Argus, and just some really exciting opportunities and strengthening of partnerships in that part of the world stemmed out of that. The cutter actually got a port call in Nuuk. And port calls these days, as men and women that, surround yourselves and immerse yourselves in naval issues, our men and women going to sea, and I suspect it's the same on the Navy, there's not a lot of port calls. So these folks that go to sea for some adventure, the adventure is the operations. The port calls are getting fuel, taking on groceries, and turning around as quick as you can. But this crew on the Campbell that got in the Nuuk had a really terrific experience there north of the Arctic Circle. And, a little bit exciting this year with the challenges of COVID, the Polar Star, our 44-year-old heavy icebreaker, the sole one on the inventory, typically would be going south here would have gone south around Thanksgiving. National Science Foundation waived off this year because of the pace of operations being a little bit diminished down in McMurdo, and they think they can get through this winter here without replenishment. But we've got the Polar Star here in early December. Next couple of days, going to sail north to the Arctic. She has not been up there in more than a quarter century. So we're real excited to projecting, our heavy ice breaking capability and some capacity up there to the Arctic for the next couple months, and we'll see what that mines here. And then shifting to the next slide, Indo-Pacific. The Indo-Pacific, we've been a Pacific Coast Guard, for a century and a half plus, but we really see opportunities, and we're sensing an increasing demand signal from the Indo-PACOM combatant commander and the PAC fleet about more Coast Guard out there. Back in 19, we had the Berthoff and Stratton on back-to-back 5-month heel-to-toe patrols over there, and they did a wide-ranging bunch of work from sanctions enforcement against the DPRK, capacity building with key ASEAN partners, the Malaysians, the Vietnamese, and you fill out from there the Philippine Coast Guard and Navy. Just a tremendous opportunity for us. This summer, one of the sister national security cutters to Kimball was out there on an IUU, illegal, unregulated, unreporting fishing patrol. She operated in and around Fiji and some of the out islands, Pacific Island nations, and we're just excited. What we bring to that region is human-to-human interaction. I think that's an alternative to checkbook diplomacy and coercive antagonistic behavior by some great power competitors here, namely China. We're excited as well. 2 of the 354-foot fast response cutters that are going to be home ported in Guam are on site in Apra Harbor today, and the 3rd cutter will be coming here in the next calendar year. But these 154 fast response cutters built down at Bollinger Shipyard in Louisiana, I got to tell you, they're terrific. Great expeditionary capability, about 8 more crew than the 110s they replace, sophisticated C5 ISR, really better seakeeping and longer legs. We're going to do some remarkable things. We've teamed them up with the buoy tenders that operate out of Guam already, and one out of Honolulu. So I'm really excited about our ability to get out and partner across Oceania. When you think about that region of the world, 50% of their GDP on all those island nations derives from the sea. And they've got a lot of dog in the fight about protecting their sovereign interests, protecting their waters from illegal fishing. What we do by partnering people to people is, maybe we can dissuade them from signing up for a dual use port to a great power competitor. So a lot of exciting things out there. Back here in Washington to support and enable these operations. In September, along with some of our key partners, Southcom, NOAA, State Department, we launched, one of our strategic outlooks. This is the 10-year futuristic plan on IUU fishing. How do you combat IUU fishing across the globe? And again, we're not signing up to be the world's maritime police force against fish. I don't have the capacity, nor would that be an appropriate role, but we're pressing in to take a new leadership role, an increasing leadership role. And we're building a a collaboration, a partnership of like-minded partners who take some ownership for this. And this prevents illicit behavior across the maritime domain. It really furthers good maritime governance and an adherence to the rules-based order. It's my vision, my team's vision for the service and roles driving towards unity of effort. You know, one that spans non-government organizations, academia, government agencies from other countries, international partnerships. I'm pretty excited about it because it seeks to sustain our global fish stocks. It protects maritime sovereignty across the globe by amplifying the message, and it illuminates the behavior of bad actors. It leverages existing resources, enforcement tools, and really our existing legal authorities to spark new focus and energy and cooperation here. And just kind of pulling that back into the Western Hemisphere, that this is just not in the way game in the Indo-Pacific Oceania region. You know, you probably saw some of the reports, you know, 350 Chinese or Chinese characteristic boats operating off the Galapagos Marine Reserve a couple of months ago. You know, that's not a new development. That Chinese fleet has fished off of South America for years, and they work north to Peru and down off of the Chilean coast. But we're seeing them in increasing numbers, and we're seeing, you know, behaviors that indicate that maybe they're not adhering to international standards, and, you know, things that drew the attention of the Ecuadorian government, so much so that they approached Southcom and asked for some support, triggered our desire, our ability to pull the Bert off, our first national security cutter, off of Eastern Pacific Counter-Drug Patrol and send her out in vicinity of the Galapagos Marine Reserve, and worked with the Ecuadorian Navy for a few days. And what we found there was, using our Scan Eagle unmanned aerial system, some of the cutter's sophisticated capabilities, was there was at least a dozen plus of the boats that we interacted with in a short, you know, couple-day period. We did right of approach, you know, questioning of what they're doing. We correlated, and, you know, some of our, and I won't say too much here in this domain, but some of our capabilities on board. And there was some things that were suspicious, you know, maybe some AIS spoofing or folks not operating their AIS. And we turned that information over to the Ecuadorians. But there's a burgeoning relationship with a key counter-narcotics partner in a part of the world that really, it's all based on, you know, the environmental significance of the Galapagos. So there's IUU close to home. We're going to sail the Stone, the 9th National Security Cutter, here in the coming months on her shakedown cruise, and part of that's going to involve some IUU fishing interaction on the east coast of South America, potentially with the Argentinians and others, the Brazilians. So just a few things on that front that we're pretty excited about in the Coast Guard here. And really, it's about that upgraded leadership role on this important topic. Food sustainment is a big deal. You know, you look at projected population growth, particularly on the African continent. You know, 40% of their protein is derived from the sea, and heavy concentration, particularly of Chinese vessels on the east and west coast of the African continent. So there's just some important work there on many fronts, from sustainment to maritime governance and to, you know, to bad actors. What we're looking for is, we're not calling out any one nation. We're calling out those that don't adhere to flag state responsibilities. You know, the fact that Ecuador is 9,000 miles from China, and it's hard to assert your flag state jurisdiction, does not absolve you from that responsibility. So we're going to see where that takes us here a little bit. And then when I kind of bring it back here a little bit, where are we with the fleet? You know, the Navy League always seems to take an interest in our capital assets. There's a lot of industry partners here that hopefully turn out for these events, even in a virtual environment. But I'm excited. You know, we are doing some remarkable things. We've got 5 major cutter classes underway. So if we could go to that next slide. You know, the first slide you'll see here is the National Security Cutter. We are in the midst of building out this fleet. As I mentioned, 9th NSC getting ready to do her shakedown, 10th and 11th still under construction down at HII in Mississippi, in Pascagoula. And, you know, some of the challenges here is, can't get these cutters on board fast enough. But in the interim period, we got to continue to sustain our legacy fleet. You know, our 210s are more than 50 years old. They're half centurions. The 270s we built in the 80s are north of 30, 35 years on the older part of that fleet. But help is coming. New ships are coming. The Calhoun is going to be NSC number 10, and we just couldn't be any more excited about what these capabilities have produced. You know, whether that's the counter-narcotics mission, whether those deployments in support of the 7th Fleet, We're getting ready to sail one of the national security cutters over towards the Yukon theater here in the coming months. And she's going to escort the first 2 fast response cutters that are to go to Bahrain and start to replace our 6 island class patrol boats that have been over there here now for, good part of 2 decades. And that's exciting. And we're going to put that national security cutter that's sailing over there into the 6th Fleet Commander's hands, Gene Black's hands. And I think there's some really exciting things where, a highly capable platform, white hull, orange stripe, maybe not a gray hull, might be able to go and access some places and reaffirm some important relationships that otherwise might not be accomplished over there. And then you sort of walk it down to, other platforms. If you go to the next slide, polar security cutters. I talked about the Arctic, but back in April 2019, and those closest to the Navy League, we awarded the contract for PSC #1. We've yet to name that cutter, but work steel cutting will start here in the coming months in the new calendar year. Pretty excited about that. Hope to have that cutter on the water and put into operations late 24 into 25, but that's a world-class icebreaker. And that's gets after replacing the 44-year-old today polar security cutter that'll be approaching, a half century when PSC #1 comes to bear. Money for second polar security cutters in the 21 budget that is, before the Congress right now that the president submitted a while ago, but hopefully we'll see some budgetary action in the coming weeks before the 116th Congress goes into sine die end of term here. And then the conversation is exciting on this front. I started my tenure back on 1 June 2018 talking about a 6-3-1 strategy, a minimum of 6 icebreakers for the nation. 3 of them needed to be polar security cutters, and the 1 was one now. I think the picture you see here in the upper right, that's the one now, and we'll start cutting steel, as I mentioned. The good news is there's been a conversation beyond the 6-3-1 strategy. The president and his team have pressed us here since this past summer, pulling together the energy of 5 cabinet level officials and OMB about saying, hey, what does more capacity for high latitude work between now and 2029 look like? So we've got some work afoot with the United States Navy right now. We clearly don't want to look at leasing options as a replacement for the procurement of ships that are going to serve us for decades to come. But there might be some bridging strategies and some leasing options. So we're working real hard on that, answering some deliverables over to the White House, and hope we can keep some momentum. Polar operations, high latitude operations has been a bipartisan, bicamerally supported issue. So I think there's some goodness coming out of this one here, and we're going to press forward. If you go to the next slide, the offshore patrol cutters, that's that middle space between our highest capably, equipped national security cutters and the offshore, the fast response cutters, the coastal patrol boats that are tremendous. And I'll come back on those, but OPC #1 Argus is under construction. I visited a few months ago down to Eastern Shipbuilding Group, and it's great to see the progress. Steel's being cut on #2, the Chase. There's money in the 21 budget for production on #3, the Ingham, and long lead for #4. So we are off to the, out of the gates and off to the races. Eastern Shipbuilding Group has contract for the first 4, and then we'll be, revisiting that here in the coming months ahead. But the goal is to build out a fleet of 25 offshore patrol cutters. This is really the backbone of our recapitalized fleet. These 25 complementing 11 national security cutters, 58 domestic FRCs, the enabling, UAS, the skiffs on board, the over-the-horizon boats, modernized helicopters that aren't too far around the corner as we partner with DoD on future vertical lift. There's just a lot of excitement if you're a cutterman, particularly on these deployers, these global deployers. So if you go to the next slide, that takes us a bit back to the FRC. We've taken acceptance of 40 of those now. And I got to tell you, as a former island class patrol boat skipper and a district commander and a sector commander that had these island class working for us, I thought that was a great platform. This ups the game. 44 feet additional length along the waterline, 8 more crew, sophisticated C5 ISR and seakeeping and range. We're just going to do some tremendous things here domestically. And those 6 FRCs that are going to Bahrain, I think, are going to be a real important tool in the 5th Fleet Commander and the NAVCENT and CENTCOM Commander's toolkit as we see an increasingly aggressive Iranian adversary. So again, those first 2 show up there, between now and the early spring, and 2 after that, and we'll build out the rest of that 6-ship footprint early in 22. But hot production line, a lot of goodness just going on down there at Bollinger Marine. If you go to the next slide, sort of what's around the corner, Waterways commerce cutters, the fleet of ships here that, 75-foot barge there with probably a 75-foot tug with about 130-foot barge, a bunch of different configurations in our existing 35-ship fleet of construction and river tenders. We're going to put a fleet of 30 new ships out there, and there's 3 derivatives. Of those 3 derivatives, there's some subtle differences, but they're all going to be tremendously capable. If you look at that fleet, on average, 55 plus years old. That fleet's as old as me, and you look how old and decrepit I am. We need to do better by our sailors. We need to put some new capabilities in their hands, better reliability, less maintenance. We're dealing with asbestos on these ships, throughout these ships, and we take it on as funding allows us. We're going to enable women to serve across this fleet. Right now, unless you're the officer in charge or the commanding officer, these ships are not equally available to both genders, and that's a place where we have to do better as soon as possible. So, we anticipate, an RFP on the street here upcoming summer, and then a contract award in early 22. But we are off to the races on 3 monohull variants. We won't be pushing any barges in the future, and the differences between the first 2 variants are pretty subtle. There's some difference on deck configuration, crane, and minor hull form. And we're going to let those together in one contract. And then what we call the inland buoy tender, the WLI variant, will follow. That'll be a separate contract award. But I'll tell you, recently visited the men and women out there in the heartland, and mostly the men because of those limitations on berthing. And I was on the Kanakee here, and that's an old ship. It's remarkable what the men and women do to keep it going. But one of their sister ships had been out of service about 80% of the calendar days over the previous 24-month period. So we've got to do better. We've got to do better for our men and women. We got to do better for the waterways operators that really enable the economic engine of the country here on those 25,000 miles of navigable inland waters. And then bottom line, I would roll up the ship community as really an exciting time. If you're a sailor in the Coast Guard, the opportunities to go to sea on world-class, platforms, state of the industry. I won't say state of the art because I don't think that's generally where government operates here in the sea service. This is state of the industry, off-the-shelf technologies. It's really going to allow the Coast Guard today to be the world's best Coast Guard tomorrow. Play that forward a bit. And these programs, years in the making. And I can tell you, there's a tremendous amount of Navy League skin in the game. From working Capitol Hill, I remember the days when Sheila McNeil was the president, and now she's an elected official in Georgia. But coming back when I was in the House Liaison Officer later in life as the Chief of Congressional Affairs with a 3-inch stack of business cards about all the members she talked to about how important the work of the Coast Guard was and how Congress had to do better to support that. And every year as we put out, the Navy League conversation about the needs of the sea services, I got to tell you, it makes a difference. We are where we are today with these 5 programs of record moving forward at good pace with the support of the Congress and the administration funding wise, and really the advocacy of the Navy League. So I want to lend my personal gratitude on that front. And then, what's right around the corner on the next slide, I'm anxious. The CNO and the Commandant of the Marine Corps and I have all put our hands and our pen and our staff work into a new tri-service maritime strategy called Advantage to Sea. I think the release is imminent, so I don't want to get ahead of the SECNAV, but this is a great document. It really rolls up, what the future looks like, the appropriate roles for the Coast Guard, the Marine Corps, and the Navy, and how we integrate those roles, and how we bring the combined capabilities and capacities of the U.S. naval forces against this great power paradigm we find ourselves operating against. So look for that in the coming weeks, maybe coming days. I think that's going to be exciting. When you think about the national fleet, there's a lot of other stakeholders there. There's the NOAA Corps, which goes to sea on a lot of research and science work, and we partner with them. Matter of fact, I just graduated the most recent tranche of NOAA officers because they are co-located with our Officer Candidate School in New London now. You look at the Army, who manages a large fleet, and you look at other maritime organizations, but we partner with all of them. That's that special space where the Coast Guard can provide some connective tissue between the naval forces of the United States, Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and the other maritime stakeholders. And I'm just excited about our 11 NSCs, our 25 OPCs, our 64 FRCs, and then the sort of the smaller cutters, multi-mission cutters, just rolling up into that national strategy. And really, what's it all point towards? I think it points towards competition. It points towards cooperation, competition, and ultimately, when you look across that continuum, a chunk of that's lethality. Where do we operate best? I say we're optimized in the below the level of conflict, below the level of lethality. We will roll into those scenarios given the existing warfighting plans, joint warfighting plans, but on a day-to-day basis, persistent contributions, the Coast Guard's coordinating and we're competing. We're offering an alternative. Those cutters that went over to the 7th Fleet there back in 2019, that's before the McCain and the Fitzgerald came out of the respective shipyard availabilities. We were able to free up a couple BMD Aegis cruisers to go to higher priority work, and we could pick up some of the slack there and offer the 7th Fleet Commander a little bit of flexibility. Those new patrol boats that are going over to Bahrain, I think those will be some of the most capable platforms that the 5th Fleet Commander will have in his bevy of capability over there. We're excited to contribute there. We can still do about $1 billion of Department of Defense support work on an annual basis, still funded at the same $340 million level we were back in 2020, and we're pressurizing that conversation on the Hill and in OMB and in the administration and over at the Pentagon, but we remain committed to the fight. And what's the so what there? I think the Coast Guard, when you go to the next slide, our special sauce is our people, new platforms, people that operate underpinned by broad authorities, Title 10 as an armed force, Title 14, our Coast Guard authorities. We're a named member of the National Intelligence Committee, as most of you know, dating back to 2002. When you roll that all up and spread it out across 11 statutory missions, I like to refer to us as sort of that vice grips or that Swiss Army knife in your toolkit that you can pull it out, you can roll it up into a lot of different adaptive force packages. You can put a 8 to 12 person leadette on a gray hull LCS or a cruiser or a DDG, and you can enable that naval warship to do counter-narcotics work. We've got a team halfway around the globe right now on another mission, but that's your United States Coast Guard, and it's an exciting time. Lastly, what's foremost on my mind heading into a new administration, it's sort of where I was when I came into the job on 1 June 2018. It was readiness. We absolutely got to put the brick on the gas pedal and keep a narrative alive about the criticality of operations and support dollars for the Coast Guard to meet our readiness needs. We were not part of that, as I said before, other Navy League discussion, not part of that 2018 bump that the president gave the DoD services. And again, it wasn't an overt omission, just sitting over in Homeland. We didn't get that 12% uptick back in 2018. So we've been scratching and clawing a couple percentage points at a time to raise our top line. If you sort of put it in context, when you look at the Navy and the DoD forces over the last 5-year period, it's seen about a 23% increase budgetarily. We're at about 7 percentage points, about a third of that. And that's tough. That's tough when you're an armed force with a lot of capital assets and personnel costs for us to compete. And when you put that outside the lifelines in a talent management lens, we're in that same space with our DoD brethren, looking for about 24% of America's eligible youth that can serve, that are physically and mentally able to serve. When you put the filter on that, only about 10% of that population has a propensity to serve. It wasn't too many years back in the 90s when 40% of that population had a family member or a family friend that served their nation. Now I think that number is somewhere less than 15%. So my men and women, our recruiters, are out there trying to find about 4,000 of these motivated, bright young Americans with a propensity to serve that want to enter the Coast Guard through our training center at Cape May, or about 500 that either go to officer candidate school or through our Coast Guard Academy. And I'll tell you, this is another place where the Navy League just helps us. Sea Cadet program, I've been involved with them over years, and just great stuff comes out of there. The exposure, what you do with young Marines, really helpful about getting the opportunities and the awareness raised outside the service lifelines to potentially bring talent into the naval forces. And for that, very, very appreciative. So as I kind of wind down here a little bit, what I'm tasked my leaders to do is we need to navigate the Coast Guard through this ongoing global pandemic with dispatch, with decisional agility. We've been blessed. We haven't lost a single Coast Guardsman, active, reserve, civilian, or auxiliarist. That rolls up to 55,000 plus about 25,000 auxiliaries that tend to be from an older demographic. But we've been blessed there. And I think we've been prudent. We've been lucky. We're going to continue to navigate forward. We're encouraged by the vaccines and the promise that, maybe in the months ahead, we can be doing the next one of these in person. We're trying to drive in that challenging recruiting environment to find Americans that make us Coast Guard more representative of the nation we serve, a different demographic. We've got some opportunities here. We're less than 15% women across our ranks. There's some good stories there. Coast Guard Academy is about 40% women. But, getting them women out of the academy and out in the waterfront and at sea and the other responsibilities, retaining them at the same percentages as their male counterparts, our enlisted ranks, driving towards the 50% representation across the workforce in America. That's our goal. That's an ambitious goal. Right now, we're trying to make some, 1 and 2 degree movement towards that, but it's those opportunities at sea. It's an opportunity where every coastie looks around and says, hey, this organization values me. They value my families if I bring a family to the mix, and they're making it competitive to be in the Coast Guard and not jump to another naval service or another DOD branch. So I'm encouraged by that. I've challenged each of my leaders to take some ownership of that. Our pathway to be a more diverse Coast Guard, more representative of the nation we serve, is by being the world's most inclusive Coast Guard. And that means everybody has to see those opportunities, that commitment from our shipmates to sort of push them up to the next rung on the ladder and help them achieve success on whatever terms they define success to be. Obviously, that's got to be, comported with the norms and the standards of armed service, military service. But we're working hard on that. We rolled out a diversity inclusion plan last year, and we're implementing that and executing that. So I'm encouraged, and I'm really honored to have the chance to chat with you today. I think generally the most important time here when we get together is really what questions are on your mind. So Mike, I'm going to turn it back to you and Leanne and see if there's any questions from the participants today, if that's okay with you.
Well, thank you so much, Admiral Schultz, and thank you for providing us with your time and your insights today. As you mentioned, we will now move into our question and answer portion. And here's our first question. Sir, could you please comment on the expected impact of a possible government shutdown on Coast Guard personnel and families?
Easy question first, right? I would say this, first and foremost, we've lived through not the potential impact, but the real impact back in late 2018, right before Christmas and through about 21 January 2019. That was challenging. We worked very hard with advocacy from the Navy League and others to try to get a Pay Our Coast Guard Act bill on the Hill. There's a Pay Our Military Act that gives DOD a little bit of insulation for that. We have not got that over the goal line with some OMB scoring provisions and other things, but there's a different level of cognitive awareness about how difficult it was for the men and women of the Coast Guard, other components in DHS, and really there was DOJ and others that were sort of impacted by that. I think the probability of living that here, obviously we don't have a 21 budget yet, and the current continuing resolution expires on December 11th. But the indicators I'm hearing from Capitol Hill, and I've had some interactions just in recent days, I think that prospect is pretty low. The reality is if we live another shutdown, it's tough. I think we're positioned to be able to pay our people into at least a pay period or two. We've sort of, sharpened our pencils from the last experience and built in as much resiliency and institutional ability to fend that off. But a shutdown would be hard. And even these continuing resolutions, we've been operating under continuing resolutions, I think more than 40, 50% of the 40 plus, approaching 50% of the last decade plus here. An organization, that's tough when you get your current year appropriation anywhere 3 to 6 months into the existing fiscal year. It's very hard to do things like contract shipyard repair work. What we've done this past year is we've got some legislative relief to actually have 2-year funding for ship repair work. We couldn't compete with the Navy because we just basically 1 September to 1 March or so, we just did not schedule any contract work because we weren't sure what the budget and the fiscal situation would be. So to the heart of the question, my concern is fairly low about that happening. if it were to happen in that remote chance, we're better positioned. And I'll tell you, I don't think the Coast Guard workforce has ever been more resilient than the last few years have sort of conditioned us to be here.
Thank you, sir. And apologies for a difficult first question, but I know that's an issue that's on the minds of our attendees. Our next question is, what are the Coast Guard's requirements for more anti-submarine warfare capability, especially in the great power competition strategic environment against China or Russia?
Yeah, a great question. And I appreciate the first question. I was kind of tongue in cheek on the difficulty. It would be a very difficult situation for our folks. So I don't mean to dismiss it there. You know, anti-submarine warfare, you know, if you turn the clock back, you know, the predecessors to the national security cutters, the 378-foot high endurance cutters, Hamilton class, you know, we had sonar capability. We had sonar techs in the Coast Guard, and we sort of walked ourselves out of that business. We're not building any capabilities, installing any capabilities on our ships today that would put us back in that mission domain or that mission space. I think we've ceded that to the Navy. And, you know, could things change, you know, as we look into the offshore patrol cutters beyond the next tranche, you know, a fleet of 25, if there was a requirement that was, you know, sort of discussed at the Joint Coast Guard Navy DOD level that said, hey, there's an urgent need to bring that capability back to the Coast Guard. I'm not saying we couldn't revisit that. Right now, I would say, you know, the demands on us are unprecedented. And, you know, trying to go back and add something like an anti-submarine warfare capability, which we employed to some degree, but not a lot, and, you know, maintaining the crew edge, the expertise, maintaining the equipment, you know, some of that equipment with other places. We operate our ships. There was some challenges there and stuff. I'm not so sure I see an immediate return to that mission space here. But again, I don't close the door on anything because we live in an increasingly complicated world, a technologically evolving world, and requirements change. But today, that's not on our immediate radar picture.
Thank you, sir. Our next attendee asks, can you address how the Coast Guard is managing the rapid increase of hurricanes that have become more commonplace in the past few seasons? Does the Coast Guard have the assets and personnel it needs for this type of situation? And I know that you touched on this earlier, but maybe you could go into a bit more detail, sir.
Yeah, boy, I wish we could manage the situation, the cause and the factors for the hurricanes. You know, clearly the fact that we had the most active Atlantic Basin hurricane season this year, I think says there's, you know, at least there's a current trend that makes us concerned that this is going to be enduring Coast Guard work. We had about a 10-year period from 05 to about 2016. 2016, Matthew was the largest hurricane in over a decade that came across Haiti and up the eastern seaboard. I just settled in as a land area commander. That was a little bit of a prep tune-up for us. There was some tragedy along the 95 corridor, Lumberton, North Carolina stuff, but the coastal impacts and the tragedy were fairly minimized, but it got us back in the game. We had a generation of Coast Guard men and women, you know, 04s, mid-grade petty officers that came in that 10-year period that didn't deal with hurricanes. You know, we've tuned our game up pretty good. 17 and 18 were really active years, and some years with big storms. You know, Harvey, where we rescued 11,000 people down in the streets of Houston. You looked at Florence that hit North Carolina and South Carolina really hard in North Carolina. Irma that came across Puerto Rico and up through Florida. That could have been a truly devastating storm, and about 9-12 hours off the north coast of Cuba took an edge off of that. Maria, that really impacted Puerto Rico, and we saw a lot of that. And then you roll into Michael in 18 down in Panama City, really hit our shipbuilder, Eastern Shipbuilding Group hard, and that caused us to go back and do some rewickering of that contract down there. And then where we are here in the 20 storm, again, I mentioned this year with 6 of those 13 hurricanes, major storms, we really could have had a lot more tragedy and devastation. And I don't want to diminish the loss of life, the impacts to facilities and livelihoods, and Lake Charles and other places right now that are scratching to get back to the old normal here. But, you know, this could have been a hurricane season much worse than it was. What are we doing? You know, we tuned our game up. You know, when we have Coast Guardsmen that are impacted by it, you know, our chief petty officers working with the Coast Guard Foundation have really developed an ability to get, you know, capability funding and relief, temporary quarters in our people's hands, so our folks can focus on, you know, the response. We get our families evacuated consistent with evacuation orders issued at the local and the county levels. We move our Coast Guard assets out of the area and we come right behind it. We have got that down to a science. You know, we are flying at the first possible moment. You know, I look back at Hurricane Dorian, which occurred here over in the Bahamas in 19, and pretty proud of the work. We were first in over there in foreign soil, you know, less than 100 miles from the Florida East Coast, and rescued somewhere north of 400 people while the United States was preparing for Dorian's potential landfall here in South Florida, further up the eastern seaboard. But that's what the Coast Guard does. We've gotten remarkably good at responding. We're partnered up with our CBP Air Marine partners, our state and FEMA federal partners to get about this business, I think, with dispatch and with really, you know, well-honed skill. So I'd say what we're doing is keeping our head in the game, keeping our folks trained, making sure, you know, we're embracing new technologies, Blue Force capabilities, so we can see our platforms operate in these difficult conditions. When we don't have some of those systems, we bring CBP Air Marine into our command centers. They've got a big pipe AMOS system that allows us to see helicopters fly in real time. How do we bring distress calls into the command centers and things like that? I would say it's been a tune-up, and then we're sort of each year we do our lessons learned to be more effective next year. But I think we're pretty good at our game right now, and we're going to continue to try to keep that edge going forward. Hopefully we're look at another decade when we don't see a lot of storms, but the climatological indicators may not look for that to be the case here moving forward.
Thank you, sir. What future roles do you see unmanned surface vessels playing for the Coast Guard?
Yeah, I think that's probably a twofold answer. I think as a regulatory agency under that bucket of 11 statutory missions I talked about, you know, we have a lead federal role on regulating, you know, navigation in U.S. waters and approaches to U.S. waters, and really a lead voice through the International Maritime Organization on the global stage. So there's a regulatory aspect of unmanned vehicles, surface, subsurface, and we'll be involved in that piece. And we've got a lot of smart men and women working on those things right now as Navy is, you know, developing and exercising unmanned vehicles. We just did some testing off of the Hawaiian Island chain here with a Sea Arc vessel, sort of similar to the 29-foot response boats, some unmanned there, and what we could do in terms of surveillance and provide security through an unmanned capability. We've done some things with sail drones and other at the same sort of parallel timeline as we did with the other craft I just talked about. So we're looking at how do you bring those capabilities, those technologies into the Coast Guard mission set, where we can potentially, you know, take a human on a boat and replace that with just a piece of technology. That's obviously potential savings there, longer persistent surveillance capabilities and capacity. And then there's the regulatory piece. You know, getting off the surface part, you know, 2.5 years ago at State of the Coast Guard out in LA, I talked about, you know, accelerating our unmanned aerial surveillance capabilities. We had a couple Scan Eagle systems, and now we've got Scan Eagle on just about every national security cutter. We just had Rand in here that looked at UXS, so unmanned aerial and surface, subsurface capabilities, and really said, boy, there's a lot of stuff out there, Coast Guard. We encourage you to take a hard look at that. And we've been looking, but I think that was a bit of a catalyst clearing call to look a little harder. So I've challenged Admiral Bushman and his team and the Deputy Commandant for Operations Policy to really take a round turn on that and make sure we're leaning in as hard as our budget and our human capacity allows us to pull those capabilities into our mission sets.
Thank you, sir. When do you think the reserve and auxiliary will be back in action?
Well, I'll tell you, the reserve is back in action. You know, our reserve ranks have shrunk in recent years to about 6,100. And one of the goals I set for my tenure was to try to get the reserve strength up about 1,000. We need to get back to 7,000 or north of 7,000. I think the good news is we've stopped the bleeding in terms of attriting people. We've had some things in this COVID environment where some Coast Guardsmen were planning on leaving the Coast Guard and pursuing other life opportunities, or leaving to take care of, you know, elderly parents or maybe working spouses where service and those challenges, other life opportunities weren't mutually compatible. We've kept some folks in. We're working very hard to make the reserve an attractive option. You know, if you get out of active duty for whatever reason, let's try to keep you on the reserve team. A young man or woman that's an E5, E6, or a junior mid-grade officer that has a bunch of experience but doesn't want or can't be a full-time Coast Guardsman. It takes me a lot of years to take a young American off the streets and exercising them in a weekend a month, a couple of weekends a year to get to that same level of skills to put into one of these 30 named storm disasters or put them against other missions in a COVID crisis. So we're focused on our reservists, and they're working hard. You know, I've got about, I think the number is about 750 with some funds that came out of the CARES Act. That's some of the first tranches of COVID relief that we put against all different opportunities and mission sets across the Coast Guard. You know, even moving 11,000 Coast Guardsmen through the normal personnel transfer season, PCS transfer season this past summer. You know, the other services sort of clamped down and weren't doing any PCS moves. You know, we fit into that same, you know, contract that allows PCS moves to move forward, and it kind of was snowballing a lot of things to late in the summer. We brought in some reservists. We created these PCS assistance teams, and we started early in the process. We did a few and saw the results and said, I think we can do this safely and efficiently and assure a good outcome for our members that were PCS relocating. And some reservists did some unique things here that tracked them across the country. There was a lifeline. If you ran into a place you couldn't get a hotel, if you ran into some challenges with movers, if movers showed up and they weren't exercising the right safety protocols and they were in your house with your families, you know, we've done some novel things with reservists. We've got reservists, you know, standing the watch when we did all the removals of 250,000 people from those cruise ships, reserve support and that. So our reservists have been busy. You know, flip into the auxiliary part of the question. It's been a hard time for the auxiliary. Matter of fact, I'm penning a letter right now to go into the Navigator, their magazine, just saying, hey, this has been hard when you got a demographic across the auxiliary workforce. You know, they're doing a lot of contributions, and they're coming up with real creative ways to do inspections at the boat ramp virtually on their phone capabilities. But they've withdrawn a little bit to protect themselves. But don't underestimate just how much impact the auxiliary continues to have. But that letter that I'm penning for the Navigator magazine says, hey, hang in there. We can see around the corner. We need you back. We absolutely need you back. The auxiliary just continues to find new places where we can put them to work. When you think about hard situations, the pandemic, the shutdown, we've now got 50 Coast Guard auxiliary clergy or chaplains. And our chaplains are naval chaplains that come over here on assignment. But these, we have as many auxiliary chaplain as we do Navy chaplains on loan to us. And I'll tell you, that's been a tremendous enabler and provider of counsel and security through tough times. And we got some auxiliary docs, auxiliary chefs that come in, give our crews a break at some of our land-based facilities. There's still ongoing work there. And then there's a training part. I mentioned that uptick of 12% recreational boating. I really need them back on the marinas and inspecting the facilities and things like that. And we just swapped out the National Commodore. Alec Maluski came on board. Alex, he was with us week before last. So they had all the senior leaders in virtually, a few in person. Alex was here in person, and we welcomed them to the team. But we'll be back. The auxiliaries are in the game, and we're going to get them back fully in the game here in the not too distant future.
Thank you, sir. Our next attendee asks, considering the increased importance of mission operations data sharing, what is your assessment of the capability and quality of interoperability with the U.S. Navy?
Let me kind of tease out too, the data sharing, you know, big data stuff. We're working on that. We've identified information sharing, data analytics, AI. That's an area where the Coast Guard needs to make some investment. You know, I rolled out in Charleston last winter at State of Coast Guard. I talked about a tech revolution in the Coast Guard. You know, we've got a backbone of C5I architecture that's old. It's been, you know, like Mr. Potato Head had added things on versus fixed. We're trying to, take on a posture that allows us to recapitalize IT infrastructure at a pace as they do in the private sector and stop band-aiding things. So you're going to get that backbone addressed, cutter connectivity, other things. So from an information standpoint, we got to get some of those fundamental underpinnings on a better track. And then, you know, we got a team here that's looking at data analytics and how do we use that, even things in that competitive personnel arena. Right now, pulling reports and really understanding and seeing trend lines. We do that with some degree of effectiveness, but it's hampered by our old system. So we're going to get after that. And then, interoperability with the Navy. I'll tell you, those polar security cutters that I talked about, we're in a joint program office with Naval Acquisitions. They're helping us get after those polar security cutters. The tri-service advantage, tri-service maritime strategy, advantages C that I alluded to. I think that really shows the synchronization with the CNO and the Commandant, the Marine Corps, and how we look at naval forces and apply them in this great power situation, national defense strategy, national security strategy world we find ourselves. You know, I think about history, and I look back to the Indo-Pacific, and I think of pictures I've seen with Marines and coasties on the beaches, places like, you know, different places throughout the theater out there. I think about, you know, Douglas Monroe here, our one Congressional Medal of Honor winner, pulling some of Chesty Puller's Marines out of Guadalcanal. And I'm not so sure there's not opportunities for greater interaction with the Marine Corps. I follow what General Berger's talking about in his Commandant planning guidelines, and these, you know, these remote battalion elements are going to be out in the Pacific regions. And obviously there's a lift component to that. And the Navy's got tremendous demands across the globe, Indo-Pacific, up rising, re-emerging Russia, Baltics, Black Sea, Mediterranean. I see some opportunities, or maybe there's a thickening alliance between the Marine Corps and us. So I would tell you, the Navy, Coast Guard, Marine Corps, Sea Services relationship, throw in the MARAD administrator, Admiral Busby and his team. I'm not sure we've ever worked in more synchronous fashion, and I think there's more of that coming in the future. That's, you know, we want to avoid redundancies. We want to leverage each other's capabilities. There's a heightened awareness, and there's a data piece, data sharing piece across all that. But, you know, these leadettes, these precision marksmen, our ability to pass secure information between our cutters, that's going on today, and we continue to refine that.
Thank you, sir. We have time for just one additional question, and here it is. What will be the Coast Guard's top priorities in the fiscal year 2022 budget proposal?
That's simple. I mean, it's the readiness narrative. I've worked very hard with Secretary Wolf in his tenure as our acting secretary, his predecessor, Kirsten Nielsen. We will, you know, re-engage, re-attack with the new team coming in to make sure that wherever we will continue through transition and beyond transition, take that readiness narrative to Capitol Hill. So, you know, when I look at the readiness, it's dollars for people so we can compete and build out that workforce. I talked a bit ad nauseum about on how, you know, the world's best Coast Guard keeps that edge. It's really about the people. It's about enabling functionalities. You know, we, the Coast Guard, are distributed across the nation, you know, 350 different units, small units, many in high cost areas. I got 10 child development centers. You know, building a whole bunch of new child development centers, as attractive as that is, probably isn't likely when I'm pulling a $2 billion shore infrastructure backlog. But things like child care subsidies, where we can put some money in a young family's hands that's in a high cost area to drive down the out-of-pocket expenses for child care. We're working real closely with leadership on the Hill that sits at our appropriations committees, maintaining momentum on those capital programs. You know, I mentioned those 5 programs, and we've been off to the races. I've pivoted the narrative a bit on my tenure. We talked an awful lot about ships and hardware and capabilities, and we've talked a lot about people in the last 24 to 30 months, and about enabling those people, whether it's greater connectivity at sea for our men and women that take to the oceans and stand the watch there, whether it's the tech revolution. All these things roll up. They're all prominent in the new budget. Maybe some additional recruiters to get out there. You know, we've got to continue to hone our edge. And then, you know, the new domain, cyber. There's a lot of cyber bodies in there. When I look across our regulatory responsibilities, you know, today, Coast Guard Cyber Command is focused on a couple big rock issues. You know, we reside on the .mil domain. So we're enabled in our day-to-day work on being on the DoD backbone. With that old aging infrastructure, you know, we've got to make some investments there. We just migrated to Office 365 here and wrapping that up. I think you'll read here in this week's press about DoD making that move. We got in early on that, and that was one of those things to drive down some of our risks. We're trying to put mobility in our sailors' hands, but there's about a 75-25% split of our cyber work on, you know, being compliant in the .mil domain, and then taking cyber and our regulatory functions to the waterfront. You know, turn back the clock to not pay attack on Maersk. You know, billions of dollars of impact. Shut down the port of Los Angeles, Long Beach, where 40% of the domestic goods that come into this nation entered for days. I think they recapitalized somewhere north of 40,000 computers in about a 96-hour period. But we've got to be in that regulatory space. We've got to bring the same level of a clear thinking as we did to oil pollution response in the wake of Exxon Valdez in 1989. We've got to bring that into the cyber domain. These increasingly sophisticated ships, the shoreside operations that enable these ships to come into our harbors. You know, you got ships now, used to be a ship came across the Atlantic Ocean and pulled into Charleston or Savannah or New York and returned. Now these ships come up through the canal, they stop in Savannah, they go up to Charleston, they go to Norfolk, maybe even New York. These are container ships that are going to be carrying, you know, north of 23,000 TEUs or containers on board. Tremendously sophisticated ships. You know, a cyber attack on an inbound ship that could block a harbor, that could shut down, you know, the just-in-time delivery system of our nation. A lot of that cyber stuff is also in the 22 budget bill. So there's a lot of challenges, a lot of opportunities. I think we've got a good product that was presented up through the department to OMB. Obviously, the transition will kick that a little bit right here, but a lot of critical things in there that'll help the Coast Guard keep our edge.
Roger that, sir. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. A very special thanks, of course, to Admiral Schultz for sharing his expertise with us, and a special thank you to General Dynamics for their support. We now have a few closing words from Navy League Executive Director Mike Stevens.
Thank you, Luke, and thank you again, Admiral Schultz, for speaking with all of us today. That was terrific. I hope all of you can join us on December 9th at 2 p.m. for the third episode of The Uncharted, our docuseries with IBM. This episode will take a look at the research the Mayflower autonomous ship can perform at sea. For more information, please go to NavyLeague.org and register. Thank you again, everyone, for attending, and have a wonderful day.